from anywhere. Anyway, Julia and Nina, welcome, and thanks for spending some time with us tonight. We can't wait to hear your stories.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Well, let's jump right in. Just by way of introduction, I'm only going to say a few words because we thought since Julia and Nina know each other for such a long time that it would probably be best for them to introduce each other. They come to us as two almost lifelong friends who met in graduate school, who have seen each other's careers progress step by step and chosen very different directions, but we're very excited to hear the story. So with that, I'll turn it over to whichever of you wants to start, Nina or Julia.
All right, well, I'll start and I'll be introducing Nina, and then we'll switch and we're going to do a little interview of each other and see where this goes. But here goes. Nina Gotlieb is a designer, mother, friend, yogi, and seeker with over 20 years of experience in hospitality and residential design. Nina was the most fashionable person in my graduating class at Penn. She is driven by curiosity and a comfort with ambiguity that has led her on a path of courageous evolution. After graduating, Nina worked in a small office, built her own upstate house, and found her home in hospitality design, working at Avrico, Roman & Williams, and later as a director of design for West Elm Hospitality. Nina boldly started her own practice in April of 2020, when most of us were just thankful to have steady employment. Her projects include Hacienda Altagracia, a luxury resort in Costa Rica, The Well in Cabo San Lucas and Washington, Connecticut, and one hotel in South Beach. Nina met the love of her life on a subway ride in 2010 and is the mother of Shay and stepmother of Shay, who's 8, and stepmother of Rue, who is 16.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, so Julia Murphy is a LEED accredited registered architect and recently anointed partner at the illustrious and ubiquitous architecture firm SOM, where she has worked for almost 15 years. Enhancing her day-to-day job responsibilities, realizing some of the largest projects in New York City, Julia works tirelessly to help move the design and real estate industries toward equality for women and minorities, having founded multiple career development programs for women. She co-founded the SOM Women's Initiative in 2011 to cultivate and promote the development and success of women at SOM and within the design disciplines. She also founded the SOM Shadowship program, served as chair of the Beverly Willis Architecture Foundation, where she currently serves on the board of trustees as chair of the nominating committee, and represents the design profession on the WX New York Women Executives in Real Estate Events Committee. And if that wasn't enough, she's also the chair of the New York ULI Mixed Use Green Local Product Council. When she's not taking on the monumental tasks of altering the physical landscape of New York City, as well as the cultural landscape of the entire architecture profession, she is a wife, a mother to 2 fur creatures and 1 human creature, a daughter, and a friend who both serves as a total inspiration to me and also lets me be the beneficiary of her savvy real estate decision out in Montauk every summer. A fun and totally random fact about Julia is that she once wore a questionable tank top to a job interview and still got the job, despite what I thought was a total fashion faux pas, because of course she did.
Thank you, Nina. So we're going to just ask each other a few questions, and hopefully this will lead to some interesting places. But Nina, I'd like to start by asking, how did you find your path to architecture school at Penn?
I I feel like it's sort of a cliche story of like, I like to play with blocks when I was a kid. And like, I actually like remember an episode of Sesame Street where I saw like a woman architect who I think was the founder of Carrie's firm, our friend from grad school. I think that was actually her because
Yeah, I
she
think you're right.
actually on Sesame Street when I was little. And I was like, oh, like, what's that job? Like, she can make buildings, like that's cool. And then also like my parents put like an addition on their house, and they hired an interior decorator who like sponge painted their room, and I was like, she gets to do art on walls, like it's functional art, that's so cool. And I feel like it was just these little things that sort of started pointing toward architecture. I'm also like, I loved art, but I'm also very practically minded. And I felt like architecture was like practical art. So it sort of started to make sense to me when I was already in college to start like looking at the architect. I went to Cornell for undergrad, and they have a very strong architecture program. So I was able to take classes and start playing around in architecture before making the decision to like fully pursue it in grad school.
That fun summer when we met in our preparation.
Yes, that's right. And what about you, Julia? You had a different experience that led you to architecture.
I did. I think similar to you, I liked to redecorate my house, and I did sponge paint something in the but I also had the example of my father and a grandfather who I never knew personally, but who had been an architect as well. My dad was an architect and started his own firm in our living room when I was probably 7 or 8. And I always look back of that was the time when fax machines and Xerox machines, I still call them Xerox machines, were sort of like the architect's favorite tool. And I remember sticky back, it was an applique onto Mylar drawings that was somewhat transparent. Anyway, I could now make and reproduce like really tons of cat stickers in our living room / my dad's office. And that was a big jumping off point. I actually didn't think that I would be an architect through most of college, through growing up, although it was all around me. I was an English major. I thought I'd be a teacher, and I had an experience. I took a history of architecture class in college, the small liberal arts college, and there was a problem on an exam to draw a floor plan in the style of Corbusier or Mies. And I really had fun, and I drew one that was in my own style. And I was like, oh my gosh, I really like this. And I had to call my dad afterwards and tell him that I was interested in architecture. I remember kind of feeling very bashful about it.
Why are you bashful about that?
I think I was bashful because I spent my adolescence being fairly obnoxious about, how boring he was and how boring it was to go on vacation and just have pictures of buildings. And so to admit that I too was actually really interested in that felt hard, but also obviously very wonderful and great too.
That's awesome. Was he very proud? What was his reaction?
Yeah, I think he was obviously thrilled and proud and happy, but I think as probably most of us all know, and maybe we're tried to talk out, somebody attempted to talk us out of studying architecture. I think he thought it was a hard career and really wanted to make sure that it was something that I wanted to do, that it was my own choice, and that I, that it was from within me.
Mm-hmm. What did you think that your career path would be when you actually started out, like studying in earnest and pursuing this in earnest? Did you think it would be, you would follow in his footsteps, or did you have kind of other visions?
I think I did. I think that was a very strong imprint on me to sort of watch him work at other larger firms, and then start his own practice and build his own firm. I mean, that was a very instructional, sort of deep inscription. And so I thought I would do that too. I thought I would get my experience, right? Get licensed. And I came to SOM in 2008, and I thought I would sort of steal all the experience and information and knowledge I could. My first couple of years, especially, was during a recession, the great, what do they call it? The great financial GFC. And I would constantly download like all these reference drawings and templates. Confession. Just, thinking, oh, I'm going to need these. And, one thing has led to another, and it stayed pretty interesting, but I hope I didn't give away my full path just there, but,
Not yet. I think there's more information.
There's always more. There's always more. Nina, what about you? Actually, I kind of want to pivot a little bit and ask you, why did you move to New York?
Why did I move to New York? I grew up right outside of New York, like in New Jersey. And my grandparents lived in Manhattan, and we grew up coming to the city pretty much every weekend. And they were probably solely responsible for my interest in like arts and culture. We were always doing something, always seeing things. And so New York was sort of in my DNA. And, Julie and I went to grad school in Philadelphia, and I was like, oh, it's another city. And I was always shocked by the scale of it. I'm like, it seems so small. It doesn't feel like a real city because New York was what I knew. And there was part of me that like wanted to stay and do something different. But like, I think when I really listened to my gut, I was like, obviously I'm moving to New York. Like, that's where all the opportunities are. That's where all the action is. And for me, that was like, I think like I tried something else on, and then I was like, nope, doesn't fit. Got to go to New York.
You mean to stay in Philadelphia?
Yeah. But it felt too small for me. I wanted something a lot bigger.
Right. Do you remember when I came and stayed with you and we like dropped resumes off at offices?
Oh my God. Yeah. That was so like we graduated during a little recession in 2003, and it was actually really hard to find a job. And we fully pounded the pavement.
We did.
You slept. I had a pull-out sofa from IKEA that I thought was very practical. And we totally pounded the pavement.
Yeah, you had a well-appointed apartment even then.
Did I made all my furniture. I went to the hardware store and had them pre-cut plywood, and I fully like made furniture.
Yeah.
Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah.
What brought you to New York, Julia? Because you didn't come to New York straight away.
I think I got a job working on a competition for the European Central Bank the summer we graduated. And so I went to an Irish firm, and I went to Ireland. And I mean, I was really green, in terms of I could 3D model, but it wasn't super accurate. And, that was a big wake up call, but, also wonderful. I worked like crazy. And I had given up my apartment in Philadelphia to go do that. And, that after that was over, I found myself back in Baltimore, where my father had an architecture firm, probably like a 30-person architecture firm. And I started sort of working there because I needed money. And, and I think I just knew that I wanted things to keep expanding. It was a lovely experience to sort of spend a little time with my dad in that way. But I don't know. It seemed like a magnetic draw to New York that was thrilling to me and is still thrilling. to this day, you know, I still have these shivers of New York moments where, I think yesterday I went to an event in Midtown and I walked. It was sort of an overcast day, and I had the best subway to take was through Times Square, which seems like the worst place in the world ever. And I was sort of crossing the street. It was very like wintry and cold feeling, and I just felt like a sense of, you know, just tremendous pleasure in the city, and, you know, like almost like a wave of nostalgia. But I'm like, oh yeah, it's really great here. I mean, I love a lot of cities. I think I was joking that I have like Stockholm syndrome for cities, you know, like once I start to know a city, and I'm sure probably a lot of us feel this way. Once I start to know a city, I start to like, I'm like, oh, I love Dallas, you know, actually I love LA. But like New York, I think holds sort of a special passion in that way. And it's endlessly surprising and has so many different sides. Anyway, we could go on and on about that.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that we did graduate into a recession, and we did pound pavement together, dropping off resumes. But I don't think that's how you got your first job.
No,
But
it is.
Is it?
It totally is.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it was
Okay.
on a different pavement pounding day that I did with Thad, who's also like another friend of ours from grad school who went more into like the city planning direction. And God, why does it sound like that's something you would do in like 1892? And it was 2003, and we literally physically like printed out resumes and
dropped off
them.
resumes.
Like that is, it sounds like so antiquated. And
but people used to get jobs like that.
People used to get jobs like that. And that's how I got a job. Like I found this small residential firm, and it was one of the stops, and it was like a rainy day, and like I looked bedraggled, and I was just like, I don't even remember what I said, but we were just like, here are our resumes. We just graduated. We need jobs, you know? I had no idea if he was even hiring or not. It was a really tiny residential firm, and I just liked their work. And yeah, I guess he called or emailed, probably called. I don't know. And then, yeah, I somehow got that job. Crazy. What about you? What was your first job? I actually don't remember what was it.
My first job, my first like real full-time after graduate school job was for Fred Schwartz.
It was for Fred. Okay.
Had a small, he was a sole practitioner, and, you know, a very dynamic, interesting, unusual, unique, idiosyncratic person, with a pretty cool office, sort of in Soho in Hudson Square. And he had been a finalist in the 9/11 World Trade Center competition, and had been invited to a lot of design competitions that year. So it was it was the year that I think I worked for him for like 2 years, but we did, you know, create like competitions for the China World Expo, and then, you know, Soho loft renovations. So it was, you know, it was pretty exciting. Fred was super amazing in many ways. I remember one of the first times we went to a meeting, and this is a closed loop, right? He's like, you know, I need you to come to a meeting with me. And I said, oh, okay, great. You know, I'd love to come to a meeting. It was at Ken Smith's office, landscape architect, and who I later realized was, you know, very close friend, good friend. And Fred had a beer. I don't know, it must have been the afternoon. Fred had a beer, an open container of beer, and he shoved it into a brown paper bag. And we walked out on the street and took a taxi to Ken Smith's office. Anyway, that was my first job. That was my first job.
So that was your first job, and you were there for 2 years. And was there anything like that you learned from that job that kind of guided you toward like the next thing for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, it was very dynamic, and I worked with some really wonderful people that I am still, you know, I'm friends with to this day. But I actually became interested in working at a woman-owned firm. And I was interested in landscape architecture and how that could be melded with architecture. I sort of saw that as a place that was somewhat neglected, that kind of intersection. And there was a woman named Barbara, there is a woman named Barbara Wilkes, who's the owner of W Architecture and landscape architecture. She was from Baltimore. She had a great story that I think she went to Cornell, if I'm not mistaken, and graduated. Probably she was sort of a little bit younger than my dad, but you know, kind of came up in the 70s and the 80s, and had a woman-owned practice, you know, in a you know, I think that was a pioneering time to be, which was very successful, and had done in a some kind of regional way, had done some architecture work at the school, the all-girls school that I had gone to in Baltimore. So I knew of her. And she did this amazing sort of midlife change where she went back to Penn to get a landscape architecture degree and moved to New York and started a firm. You know, I think she was probably for at least 45, if not, you know, beyond that. And anyway, so she had a small firm. She had a partner who, Alex Washburn, and I worked with them for a few years. But you know, which was also a very, you know, very interesting firm, very nice work, very kind of family feeling firm. It felt a little bit more regular and professional, you know, a little bit more grounded in real projects. But you know, and an amazing learning experience.
Mm-hmm.
What was you? What was number? I gave some graphic detail of like what got me from number 1 to number 2. What did you figure out? Wasn't he like a Dutch architect?
He was of Dutch descent, but American. His parents were Dutch, but he was born here. And yeah, it was really small. I learned so much there. Like because I think we were so small, I got like exposure to everything. And we did mostly private residential and some like corporate interiors, but it was very heavy. Like it was like I learned a lot about like millwork detailing, and like, you know, we sort of got into that smaller scale. And we did interior design for a couple of our residential projects. And so I feel like I got a really great foundation there, and a lot of exposure, because like, you know, he wasn't in his own private office, like we shared one little space together, and I really just got a good broad understanding of how like a small studio works, what the process is, like everything, because it was my first job ever. I mean, I guess I had internships beforehand, but and at some point I was there for 3 years, and then at some point I just, you know, living in New York, I was going out to all these great restaurants and like seeing the incredible design and being like, I want this, I want to do this. You know, it was like one thing to design like a beautiful house and play with somebody's nice fat budget and spend their money, and like, but then you give over the keys and you're like, goodbye forever, you know, project. And I liked how hospitality was kind of like, I could actually invite people I love. Like I could experience it as a guest. I could say, friends, family, go to this place that I made, like have fun there. I wanted something that was more public, that a lot of people could experience. And I remember like telling this to my boss and be like, let's do more restaurants. And he was like, great, find the projects and we'll do them. And I was like, okay. And I would like write to random food bloggers and be like, do you know anybody who needs an architect for a restaurant? Like, and it was so not the way to go about getting work that way. But I tried, and I really appreciated that he was like, go, like, try to get that work, you know?
Mhm.
And then I knew that I needed to probably like actually leave and go to a proper like hospitality firm, because I didn't even actually know that that existed. I remember when Avroco opened public, their own restaurant. Avroco is huge now, but back in the mid 2000s, they were like small and scrappy. They opened their own restaurant underneath their office on Elizabeth Street. And I remember seeing it in Metropolis, and I was just like, yes, like, oh my God, I have never had work like speak to me like in such a way that I was like, these people, I need to learn from these people. I'm gonna go there. And then I didn't go directly there. I actually ended up taking a little bit of time off because my partner at the time and I bought land upstate, and I was like, I have no idea how to build a house from scratch. I need to like learn how to build a house from scratch. So that was like a weird little like 8-month, 10-month diversion where
Yeah, I remember when you did that, and you're like, I'm gonna quit my job and work on a house. And I was enthralled because one, were you gonna like draw the foundation and the roof eave and
yeah.
and that was amazing. And you were like, I think it was so courageous. I don't know, especially for me at that moment to like step away from having a job and like take a chance on I'm gonna do this and see where it goes and build
Yeah.
this thing.
Yeah. And I had no idea what I was doing. And but also like, I feel like that
But
benefit.
you kind of did though.
I mean, I had like,
be
we
honest.
did at with the firm I was working at, we did a house in Atlantic Beach and we put an addition on. So I learned, like, we did a roof detail, we did a foundation detail. I'm like, I got this. I can build from the ground up. But it also like, if you don't know what you don't know, you're not as intimidated by it. So you just
Mhm.
do it. And like I had my trusty graphic standards and, Google, and I figured it out. Plus, like I wasn't licensed. So I needed a licensed architect to kind of like vet everything anyway and sign off on it. So I was like, the licensed architect is not going to let me build something that's terrible and is going to fall down. So, and I was able to like really have fun with it, like to really understand how I wanted it to look and design into that. Like I did this like hidden gutter detail and this like stepped foundation detail that like, I was like, can I do this? And they were like, yeah, sure, why not? It probably added to the cost because I think our foundation walls were like way thicker than they needed to be. But,
it was
and
a
that
good
was,
house.
it was a good house.
Yeah.
It was I learned a ton from that too, because you just learn so much by when the buck stops with you, right?
Yeah.
So I did that for 10 months, and then I knew like when that went into construction, I got a job at Avroco because I was like, this is the next right step for me. I must work with these people. So
Right. I remember the employee dinner that you got to have at Avroco.
oh my God, yeah, because they had their own restaurant. So we got to have family staff meal with with all the restaurant staff.
Yeah.
We would just go down at 5 o'clock every day, go into the kitchen, get staff meal.
That was
Most often bring it upstairs and eat at our desks. Sometimes we stayed down there. I'm smiling at you, Helen, because Helen and I worked at Avroco together. And that was fun.
About to say, those were the days.
Those are the days. I know. We got one free shift drink every day, which we all took advantage of. And we very often worked until whatever, 8, 9 o'clock at night, and then just ended up down at public afterwards. And that's what you can do in your 20s.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, and then that was my foray into hospitality, and I've been there ever since.
You found your place.
I did. It was fun.
Yeah.
Where do we go now? I'm looking at our list of questions here. My next question was actually like, you've been at SOM for about 15 years now. So you went there right after Barbara, right?
Yeah, I did.
So
I was going to stop here for like 2 years was my plan.
You were going to stay at SOM for 2 years?
Yeah, I was going to like steal all the drawing templates and AutoCAD blocks and then.
Wait, so that's interesting because what were you going to do with
it? Well, I don't know, Nina, maybe I didn't think that far with an AutoCAD block for like a skyscraper elevator bank. No, I mean, I thought I would start my own firm. I thought I would do the sort of the Brooklyn brownstone. I thought I would do people's bathrooms and then kitchens, and then someday I would get a coffee shop, and then I would get school or an addition. I thought that would be my path.
So you were gonna go to SOM, which is like the most official, like if you looked up architecture firm in the dictionary, like the SOM logo would be there. So what better place than SOM to steal all the templates so you can be set up to start your studio?
Yeah, I guess I would also say that when I was working at a smaller firm and I things got under construction, I had drawn a whole project kind of with some oversight but limited, and the concrete started pouring and things were fast and furious, and that I think it's that time, like on your house perhaps, you realize like, ooh, I didn't draw that elevation, like ooh, I didn't see that, didn't see this, and I also thought that I thought my sort of technical education was very limited, because it was. I still, I still remember crying about a model at Penn in our first semester. Do you remember the window of exchange?
Yeah.
And I had poured all this resin into like a stainless steel contraption, and it fell apart, and I was crying. And I remember our professor said, "It's the ideas that matter." And we weren't allowed to use glue. And he was like, "It's the ideas that matter. Go get your glue." And I think that was perfectly, that was fantastic. It was, it was a wonderful experience, but I did think that I needed this like technical boot camp. And so I came to SOM, and I didn't exactly find it because, that I'm not sure that even exists. Right. But I found a lot of smart people, and I wanted to work on a building with sort of a more, I don't want to say sophisticated, but maybe I do, with steel or, big foundations or elevators, curtain wall. I wanted to understand some of those systems. So I came here and found that I was first on a Korean tower. We had a mutual friend from our class at Penn who was Japanese, and he was working here, and he was working in the curtain wall, like sort of the curtain wall or enclosure group. And he handed in my resume and sort of helped me get hired. So they put me also in the curtain wall enclosure group. But it was not, it wasn't like what I'm best at, but it sure did help me learn things fast. What I was going to say is that I got off that project onto a project for John Jay College that was under construction on the Upper West Side, and I ended up doing CA on a building that was super interesting, very, very program driven, a lot of kind of diversity of program, and that was really great. I was like, check, I got what I came here for.
So would you say that your experience there like helped you sort of realize like what you were good at, like where your strengths were and what you didn't really care about?
Well, I would never admit, and maybe that's the difference between you and me. I don't think I'd be brave enough to admit that I don't care about it. But
there's always stuff that you feel like, I mean, I had a realization when I was trying to get licensed that I actually didn't give a shit what was behind the walls. I did not care. I'm like, why am I getting my license? So,
right.
So what was your moment?
I think I think I reached a point at SOM where I thought, okay, I got that initial thing. And what I've always told people, like, when I'm interviewing people to come to a larger firm or to come to SOM, there's a million jobs here, right? And, they change with the projects, and that's common across architecture. But, I've also seen people come through SOM who were interested in this and wanted, in healthcare and wanted to do a hospital. And then they're like, I'm really, I'm interested in like managing an airport project. Right. And like, there's just so many lanes that, if you ask me how many jobs I've had at SOM, I've had, like 25 jobs of my day-to-day being significantly different. And that's sort of what kept me here, that after that period of feeling like I needed to get this proven. And I think women, I think sociological studies show that women do this more than men. Sort of, I need like the credentials, I need the experience, right? But I do think kind of moving through that, it gave me a sense of, okay, I've learned this enough to know that I'm not the best talent at this thing, but I see where some of my talents are, and I'm okay. I think you always need a little bit of both, right? You need to be doing something that you don't know how to do and be learning to be happy and fulfilled. But you also need to be tapping into your natural talents and strengths, or else it's just going to be suffering. So for me, I moved into sort of a management role because that was consistent, right? I was always kind of talking a lot and a little bit bossy. I didn't always feel like I had the technical backing for it all. And that's proved to be an interesting thing for me. I'm thinking right now we just started a project that is going to it's going to be certified living building challenge. And, that's been a whole new thing. I feel like, I'm like going off on a tangent here, but, that's what's kind of great about design and architecture, and things have changed significantly. And it's a great opportunity to, I think we all loved learning, right? And learning about a new program, kind of typological program, or, sort of the climate crisis, and, how do you build a building maybe significantly different? I think that has kept things pretty interesting. When did you know that you were going to start your own firm?
So I never thought that I would actually have my own studio. I thought I was going to be like the kind of person, actually more like Julia, but like in a different way, where I would because I worked in corporate settings for a while, and I was like, I'm going to like work my way up to sort of like creative director type role. And I was at West Elm at the time. I was there for 3.5 years. I was hired by West Elm to launch a hotel brand for them in 2016. And that was a cool experience because I had come from a brand background. My previous experience was at Starwood Hotels. So I understood the role that like design played in sort of like maintaining a brand and evolving a brand, but I had never had the challenge of like starting a brand from scratch. Especially like furniture design and lighting design has been such an integral part of like what I've been doing since my Avroco days. Like we designed every single thing completely custom for all of our projects. We like very rarely just kind of like spec something off the shelf. And so I really had like a good background in product, and I thought it would be so cool to see how to do that on like a mass scale, and to basically create a brand from scratch, like really kind of exercise a different part of my brain, start to set up like standards for contract grade furniture that they didn't have because everything was residential. It was just like this incredible challenge. And I was super into that, but then the whole venture completely fell apart for like, that's like a conversation for another time. But like once it fell apart, like my team, I oversaw interior design and product development. We were designing furniture unique for every property. And that kind of fell apart, but like our team was kept intact, but we were sort of like moved over to support another new business, which was B2B. And it was mostly sales driven, but it was really just about the product. And then at that point, I was like, okay, this path I thought I was on is just doesn't feel like it makes sense for me anymore. I thought I would be happy just maybe doing product or focusing on that. And actually even just staying in like the director role. So there was a few things that were happening. One, like I really didn't like the management part. Then I really like realized that I wasn't fulfilled unless I was really in the trenches, getting my hands dirty and actually like designing the thing rather than just giving direction. And my job was too big. I just could not do that. I had to like, I had to get out of the trenches, and I just wasn't as fulfilled by that. And then also I realized there that like, I'm also not fulfilled unless the work I'm doing is experience driven. What I was doing is very sales driven, product driven, and I learned so much and loved it, but it was like really time just to go. I was just like, okay, like I've come to terms with like, this is not going where I wanted it to go. What's next? And I racked my brain, like, where else can I go to become this like corporate creative director? And I was like, I don't think there's anywhere to go. Like, I don't really want, there was nothing I could think of beyond just like, you know, getting my own projects and just seeing where it went. There was no grand plan to start a studio. I actually wanted to start a hospitality company, which I still want to start. I do. And I'm actually starting it. Like I've actually started working on it separately. But the plan was to like, I'm like, okay, I'm going to put the bones of this hospitality company together and just freelance while I, just to keep money coming in. And this was a plan that I put in motion at the end of 2019. And then February of 2020, a good friend of mine, another former Avroco colleague, was design director at Auberge, which is a luxury resort brand or luxury hotel brand. She was like, oh, we have this project, like, I really want an East Coast designer for it. Do you know anybody? And I was like, I'll do it. And she was like, oh, I didn't know that you were like leaving your company. I was like, yeah, I thought I was going to just ghost design furniture for like influencers or something, but a hotel sounds good. Like, I'll do that. And she was like, great. And she put me in touch with the developers. We hit it off. I got the project. Miraculously, now that I understand like the RFP process for hotels, I'm like, how in the world? I think it's because I was ridiculously cheap. But great, got it. And then we all know what happened in March 2020. And my bonus paid out in April. So I was like just motoring toward April. I was like, April of 2020, I'm going to leave my job and start this hotel project. And March happened and our CEO was like, nobody loses their jobs. Everybody, this is going to be great. And I was like, please lay me off. Please give me a severance package. And so I had to leave because, it was also like, it wasn't as easy as that. I was like, the world is on fire. What am I doing? Like, this is insane.
I remember when you FaceTimed me and told us, and
you were like, what are you smoking?
I think it was really brave.
Yeah. Emotionally, like the train had left the station. I was like, no amount of like global crisis is going to keep me here. Like I was already there. I had a project. It wasn't like I was flying blind. I was, they had assured me the project was still going to go. And so I jumped.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if we pivot just a little bit and because I think we had some interesting questions that we're probably running out of time for, and maybe we do sort of like a fast round and then we can turn things over. But I think it would be interesting to get some of these. Maybe we'll just alternate, and be like quick answer. Okay. But I like this next one that we wrote because we wrote questions together. It's a little bit leading, but when did you first experience inequality in the workplace?
Inequality in the workplace would be probably.
or discrimination or.
Well, I mean, definitely like in my very first job, like going to a job site and having the GCs like not take or not, or the people working like, you know, in construction on the site, not trusting my guidance or having me tell them that's not good enough, do it over. And they're like, what do you know, little girl, you know? Or like even saying, even when I would prove to them that I knew what I was doing, having to endure comments like, oh, wow, you actually know what you're talking about. I'm like, you know, and that's when I think I realized, and that was very early on. And I was kind of like, oh, this is a real thing, you know, it really is a boys club, you know?
Mhm.
And even at some point, like changing the way I dressed, to look less conspicuous.
That's why you were advising no tank tops for the job interview.
Yeah, I know. That would probably coincided with that. And just to think about how I dressed at that time, like, oh, like it makes me shudder to think that I did, but I tried it out because I was like, I can't endure this anymore. Like I need to garner respect. So I tried to like look like a dude, you know? I mean, I like just maybe inconspicuous with like just generic button downs and like the black pants and like, you know, it was just, I don't know. So there was that part of it that I eventually got over once I sort of like was confident enough to know, like, I do know what I'm talking about and it's actually your job to listen to me. So do what I'm telling you to do, you know? And then I, you know, wore heels on job sites and dresses and whatever the fuck I wanted. And you know, and then corporately, like, I mean, I worked at a place where men got promotions like Halloween candy and women had to work 10 times harder to get what the men got. Like if you were a good looking man, like an attractive young man, you were promoted. Like there were such young, inexperienced men in positions of power and women who were so smart, such hard workers, had worked there forever, who were just moving like just so slowly, incrementally, like they were being given complete breadcrumbs to stay there. And it was infuriating, absolutely infuriating. And I had a guy, one of these fucking inexperienced men, actually tell me in a meeting that I needed to smile more, that it was very unpleasant. It was very unpleasant to work with me because I didn't smile enough. I'm like, maybe because you don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Well, that's interesting. We're not doing a good job of answering these quickly, but these are.
I know, sorry.
I think these
I
are
have so much to say about
questions.
that.
I'll just say that I don't think I had any consciousness. I didn't have your experience because I don't think I was conscious enough. But when I got to SOM, it became, you know, SOM, you mentioned, I think like a corporate environment, but, you know, you could pull up like a grid of the faces and there were no women partners. And there might've been like one woman director and it was glaring and it was, you know, it seemed antiquated to me. And I started to think about how to fix it. And there was a surprisingly good reception to people who were like, oh yeah, you know, we just have been waiting because we thought it would just get better, you know, as the schools, you know, continue to put out 50-50 or more women even than men. But yeah, that was it. I felt a little silly, I think, almost to be so far along, to be like 30 and have gone to sort of feminist single sex schools and, you know, having worked at a woman-owned firm and then to be like, oh, you know, oh my gosh, what did I find here? And maybe how can we fix it? All right, should we do the rapid round?
Okay. I was gonna say, do you want to talk more about like what that led you to do at SOM, like how you were motivated to resolve that, or do you want to just like do the other stuff?
We could do either. Maybe I'll do it quickly that I think
we can come back to that question.
Yeah, maybe we'll come back to that one.
Okay.
All right, maybe we'll do like super quick. Nina, what are you really good at?
I'm really good at thinking on the tiniest little scale. I love the details. I love thinking at the scale of a fraction of an inch.
That's amazing.
What about you?
I'm the opposite. I think I'm really good at, and I've been trying to ban martial and sports metaphors from my vocabulary. But I remember, I was an athlete. I wasn't like a real great athlete. I'm not like the strongest or the tallest or the fastest. But I always kind of understood the field and positioning and where people should be, and, kind of like a game sense. And I think I have a pretty good game sense. All right, rapid question.
Okay.
Who has helped you?
My network of people. I never had like a mentor with a capital M. I think I've leaned heavily on friends. I've been very, very lucky to work with like mostly extremely solid people, with a few bad apples in there, but like mostly I think everybody's amazing. Everybody's supportive of each other, at least the people that I've kind of come across and kept close to me. And right now, I think like there's a small network of like small studio founders that I have leaned on in the last like 3.5 years since I started my studio, that has been just like gold, like beyond valuable to me. So I think like, yeah, friends, colleagues, like my kind of just like industry group.
Like a mesh.
Yes, like the solid, the net, the basket. What about you?
That's great. Who has helped me? Wow, a lot of people. My dad helped me a lot in being a good friend. And I've had some really great mentors. Beverly Willis, who passed away this year at 95, was a mentor and someone who took me seriously. I think sometimes when I think about the people who helped me, were people who took me seriously, and made and kind of forced me to take my own self very, very seriously. And that was tremendous. How has being a mother impacted your career?
I'm very efficient now. I don't fuck around. Like, there's no time to waste. Every minute is precious, and you have to get as much done in your window as possible so that you can be like very present for your children. And I feel like I am so much better at my job since being a mother. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. You?
I think I feel the same. I feel like, people are weird when you're pregnant, or
Yeah.
you're gonna come back, or I don't know. But
yeah, I mean, and that's sexism. That's like the assumption that like you're going to be like the 1950s housewife who doesn't care about anything but her child anymore.
Yeah, one of my favorite things that I've done was I hired a woman who was like 6 months pregnant. And I feel like you're not even allowed to say this, right? But I was like, okay, I'm going to make this person an offer. And everyone was kind of like, you are, but you can't say anything, right? You can't say anything to me about this. And she started working, and she's been so amazing. It was her second. And I knew that it was like her second. I was like, holy shit, if you can like have a young child, she was, a full-time job, and you're pregnant and you're looking for a job, like, you are a killer and I want you.
Yes. Agreed.
What role has your partner played in your ability, and by partner, I mean your romantic or life partner, in your ability to balance work life?
I travel a lot for work. My projects are not in New York. Mostly they're everywhere else. And it's been it's incredibly helpful to have a partner that I can just depend on to take care of our child while I'm gone. I think that's probably the biggest thing. But then there's also like, my partner happens to also be in the design business. He's a landscape architect and has his own studio. So he's very sympathetic to what a small studio, like founder, owner, principal, whatever you call us, how that can pull you and what it means around deadlines and all of that. So having that support and not having to explain why has been very helpful.
Yeah, I feel much the same.
Yeah.
I have a new situation in that my husband is not currently working. And it's the greatest thing ever. You know, I'm worried about money, but it's like amazing to have, and it feels kind of feminist in a way to me, because he's kind of happy, you know, like there's a lot of work at home and he's doing
Mhm.
it. And, you know, I don't know how sustainable it is, but it certainly is like a good recommendation for, you know, all the unpaid work that happens in a family. You know, and sort of it's just been an interesting time for me to observe some of that.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's like the dream.
Yeah. How has your privilege impacted your choices?
This is something that like I just don't think is talked about enough, because this is a profession that is incredibly rigorous and does not pay well. I mean, we work just as hard as like any other profession. We have advanced degrees like that cost a lot of
Expensive ones.
licensing, like everything costs a lot of money, and we don't get paid very well. And I think that can end up excluding a lot of people from the profession, or make it that much more challenging. And I feel like it should be acknowledged that like I, you know, had help. Like we graduated in a recession and my grandparents paid for my apartment until I could find a job, which took like 3 months. And not everybody is able to be in that position and have that to depend on. And I think that doesn't get talked about enough in this particular field.
Yeah. I totally agree.
Yeah. Do you have
I think-
experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I think about is that I'm a third generation architect.
Mhm.
I should probably feel like I belong, right? And I don't know that that's always been true, right? Because I think it's a really hard profession, and I think it's hard for women, and I think it's, you know, anyway, you know, and if I think that, right, you know, and I had a lot of help and I had models, right? You know, it wasn't like I didn't know any architects, right? I knew a bunch.
Yeah.
But, you know, if I can feel, you know, sort of a lack of belonging, like imagine how someone, yeah, without all that specific privilege.
Yeah. Plus it's not just a boys club, it's like a white boys club too.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Yeah. Right. So having like that picture, you know, maybe the last one is what is sort of the next generation taught you?
Oh, this question.
Yeah, this one.
It's so interesting. I think that we might be the first generation that actually pays attention to the next generation, right? Because I don't think anybody really did before then, before us. And I think they're so fascinating in that they know how to advocate for themselves. Like we did not know how to advocate for ourselves at all until we were well into our careers, and they know that. And I think that's extremely valuable, and that's going to serve them well.
Yeah.
That's one thing.
I know it's almost kind of like an old person thing to say, right? On the next generation, and to stereotype a generation, which I recognize, but I also think that, you know, a lot of the younger people that I work with are, you know, idealistic in that way. You know, I think standing up, but they're also kind of standing up for things that they think are right. And, you know, voicing things that are clearly not okay. I'll give one example, and then maybe we'll open it up for questions. But early in the pandemic, we at our firm, we had a pay cut. You know, there was just a lot of uncertainty. And, you know, we were all trying to make sure that everyone could stay employed, and we weren't sure that money was going to continue to come in. So we were just trying to be really careful. And then, you know, I think we all know what happened in 2020, that, you know, a lot of work continued to happen and things rebounded. And, you know, and that group, I remember experiencing a pay cut in 2008, or when things went upside down. And, you know, we were like, okay, heads down, let's just try to keep our job. And this group, I mean, it was a different situation. It was like, hey, where's our money? Like, we want our money back. And I was like, oh, yeah, like, that's cool. You know, I think you deserve it. You deserve your money back. We all deserve it.
Exactly. Yeah. Like
So-
they're the ones who are gonna like really change the culture that we all talk about changing. I mean, you're really changing the culture.
Well,
You are.
anyway, I think maybe we should I don't know. I think we should open it up for questions, right?
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
do it.
Let's do it. Anyone, if you guys have any questions, well, there are a couple that I know, Nancy Nancy had to step out, but Anik, you put some in the chat, but everyone else, by all means, raise your hands, turn on your cameras. We'd love to see you, those of you that haven't yet. I know I already have a couple of questions, and maybe just as a segue to where you left off, Julia, maybe this is a good opportunity for you to tell us a bit about your women's initiative at SOM.
Yeah, absolutely.
While people, start to populate their questions.
Yeah, so there had been women partners. In fact, I think the first woman partner was in like 1974 at SOM. Sometimes, sorry if I go into like SOM history, because it's an interesting place. It's been around for a while, and there's it's like a microcosm of history and sociology and history of modern architecture. But there had been women partners, but there weren't any. Anyway, so Marilyn Taylor, who probably many people know of, had started sort of a group of, you know, kind of people went to lunch together. But we sort of revived that in 2011, and it was sort of a forerunner to a lot of the ESGs that we have today. But I think it gave me a sort of a soapbox, right? It had an interesting kind of impact on putting me in a position of leadership and maybe power that I wouldn't have otherwise had. And it stayed a pretty sort of self-organizing group of ambitious young women who speak their minds in the firm. And, you know, it's been interesting sort of as I have become more senior in the firm, sort of experiencing the change of, you know, being the leadership, right? Being the and it's stayed pretty fresh with, you know, it's also one of the wonderful things about a larger firm that, you know, we get a lot of young talent, like a lot of, you know, very interesting people from all over the world. So it's been this interesting voice piece, and we now have really active Pride group, a really active Architectos group, and a NOMA group. And, you know, I think the Women's Initiative kind of formed an umbrella and like charted a little bit of a path for that. But it's been great to see those other groups and sort of, you know, become active, because a lot of the things I think that the Women's Initiative talked about, right, you know, like issues of transparency, work-life balance, were things that everybody cared about. They weren't necessarily just women's issues. But anyway, it's been an interesting thing. And it's been an interesting thing to kind of watch on all sides. In fact, I just recently, they have elections, and I had forever been like the advisor, and a woman who has been a mentee of mine, who was the head of the Women's Initiative at some point. I think I kind of tapped her when I'd sort of run out of steam. I tapped her to become the sort of the chair of the Women's Initiative. And she recently, they held an election, and it was like a democratic election. It was like, and I was on the ballot, and my mentee was on the ballot, and she got elected. And I thought it was like the coolest thing ever. You know, it's like mission accomplished. Like I've even written myself out of this, and these other people have taken over. So I thought that was cool.
Well, I think someone unmuted themselves. Helena, did you have a question for either Nina or Julia that you wanted to ask? Maybe not. Well, maybe she'll come back. But wanted to go back to something that Nina talked about very early on in her talk, especially in lieu of the fact that we have a lot of entry-level people here who have joined us. And, you know, when you're facing your first job and you know that your first job isn't right, and I think, Nina, you mentioned that in your talk, like, I think you said, that I tried something on and it wasn't right. Can you speak a little bit about what you mean by that
Oh,
specifically?
I did say that, but I don't remember what the context was. Well, I
This was
feel
your
like,
first
I mean,
internship, your first job, I believe it was.
yeah, but it wasn't like, I mean, I learned so much there, but I think what it wasn't that anything was like wrong with that. It was more about paying attention to what like got me excited and what I wanted to do. And I feel like I had an incredible foundation built for me at that firm because I just learned everything about how to be like a working person, like even down to like leave your Outlook open all day because that's when you see emails come in. So you know, like I didn't even know to do that, and I would see like not see emails come in and not answer them. I would just be like working away, and my boss was like, leave your email open. So like just how to be like a working person, and also just like what our whole process of like design to execution was. But I just realized I really wanted to be in hospitality. Like I also didn't want to be an architect with a capital A. Like it just wasn't where my interests were. And I was just following the path that I thought I had to follow, because that's kind of what's laid out for you, at least in our experience with school, in my opinion. Like you get your license but like it's weird, like look, if you look at the cross section of like people we graduated with, we had the same exact degree, the same education, and like I went to this like small residential studio, and some people we graduated with ended up like straight away working on like huge like city infrastructure projects and master planning at airports. And it's just wild that we actually have the same education. We learned the same things, but I think our brains work on different scales, and that's maybe not addressed enough in school. Like it's okay to like, if you're interested in the smaller scale, if you're interested in interiors, like that's still architecture. You know, it's not like paint colors. It's like what we do is interior architecture. I may not be responsible for like foundation detailing and core and shell, but like I make the space. I make what people sense, you know, when they experience something. And that's kind of, once I realized like that's where my interests were, I just followed it, you know.
That's why I asked the question. This has come up on other seminars where our mentors have talked a bit about the fact that there is no wrong turn, that your experiences at work tell you something about yourself, even if they don't feel right. At least you've learned something that you don't want, which is as valuable as what you are pursuing that brings you joy that you do want.
Absolutely.
And I think, Julia, you spoke a little bit about that too, but it was in realization that SOM was a pretty cool place when you didn't expect to stay there that long. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know, I also in talking through this, I remember my first job and sort of, you know, having moments of suffering and but feeling like such this heavy load of like I can't jump around, right? I've got to like, I started this job, I've got to like stay here for like a good enough amount of time to like you know, work through it. And I think like, you know, that's there's a balance there, right? Of sticking around long enough to get to the other side of something. You know, and certainly projects, right? The time scale of a project. I mean, I think like, you know, time scale is kind of interesting, right? like I've been working on Manhattan West development in New York. It sort of just finished. The last tower just got its C of O. And I started that in 2009. You know, and that's just a crazy long time. And anyway, nobody needs to work on a project for that long necessarily. But, you know, I think sometimes if you jump too quickly, you don't turn things around. But you know, it's a delicate balance there between, you know, knowing your gut, making a decision that's going to be right for you, right? And being open enough that you know, that sometimes things do turn a corner, and you know, it's a hard job, right? And you know, sometimes with all relationships, you have to like build them, right? And you know, see a project through the dark times to get to the end of the tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
The tunnel.
Actually, there's a question that came up in the chat, and I think it's a good one. I know both of you have had experience with smaller and larger firms. And, you know, Julia, I know you mentioned that you sought out SOM because they were very specific resources that you were hoping to gain there. I think you mentioned you didn't quite get them in the beginning. But I would love for both of you to kind of speak on what experiences you got in small versus larger firms, and what you found, what you kind of walked away from each experience with. Like, you each clearly learned something about yourself in your very first job that sent you to the next post. And both of your first jobs seemed to be in smaller firms. Then you kind of went in slightly different directions. So yeah, I'd love if you guys could speak a bit on small versus large firm, and what you learned, and what resources were available, and what different types of things you learned in each one.
Nina, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, all the actual design studios I worked at were small. It wasn't until I pivoted to like the brand side, like the hotel brand side of things, that I went like large corporate. So I've never worked in like a large firm or studio. But I think like starting in a small studio and getting exposure to absolutely everything was a good foundation for me. I mean, or maybe it's the only experience I have, so it's like it's what shaped me. But I think, yeah, at a small studio, you get like a bigger picture, and you understand, like my boss literally sat next to me, so I understood like what business development looked like, the phone calls that he had to make, what it looked like to take care of a client, because we are in the service business, you know, and that's just like not necessarily something that is talked about in architecture school, because it's just about like be the best designer you can, but it's really, there's service there, and it's a business. So yeah, running a business, taking care of clients, like what, like you know, and it's not just one pretty, like you're the curtain wall person, right? Like it was like we got exposure to everything, so because you just did. So I think that's the benefit of a small studio. Maybe Julia, do you want to speak to like what a large firm, like the large firm experience is like?
Yeah. I mean, I think I already sort of mentioned that I think there are like a lot of pathways in a larger firm, ideally, right? In a good one. You know, sometimes in a small firm, single owner, right? There, that person owns that firm, and that, you know, that might be you know, there could be potential limitations if for forward movement or ownership and things like that. I mean, God, I remember starting at SOM and, you know, having the plotter run out of ink and having it refilled by someone.
Yeah.
That. I mean, I really did appreciate that, right? Like a marketing department, you know, people
Yeah.
who are going to help put together the brochure. That's really interesting. And I guess the other thing that I think is interesting about a larger firm, you know, I think for young people, even though this was true in smaller firms, like, you know, my social life was with my coworkers a lot. So it's nice to have like a cohort around. And it's nice to be exposed to people who have new ideas, or who, are doing a weird research project, and you learn something about it just by going to work. I know that sounds lazy, right? But I learn a lot from the people I work with telling me about things, whether it's sort of like an HR kind of related item, or timber construction, new technologies. I learn a lot from just the flow of kind of being in the flow, and that's pretty nice. I think that in smaller cities or in smaller practices, you have to work harder to make sure that you get exposure to kind of new and different ideas that you might not know already.
Perfect sense. Well, I have a kind of fun question for Nina. I know you have an undergrad degree in cognitive psychology, and so I wonder how having that foundation, what you still potentially tap into working as an architect, or how that kind of shaped how you moved forward in architecture.
Well, it's fascinating to me that it actually is so foundational to what I do, because I just didn't necessarily think it would be. But the way I personally approach design is really fundamentally about curating experiences, so much more like a look and feel and a concept and what the client wants, is important, but I'm constantly thinking about how to take care of the people who experience the space, from the moment they set foot inside to through the entire choreography and journey of the experience, right up until they leave. And it's really I did a lot of research in college on navigation and wayfinding, and the effects of space on one's emotions and color and volume, all of the how all of that kind of affects you on an emotional level. And I guess it's environmental psychology, but that, it comes into play every single day in what I do, because we really kind of dance back and forth between what a plan that makes sense is, or an elevation or detail, and okay, so now let's put ourselves in the person's shoes who's walking through this space, who's sitting down. What are they looking at? How do they feel? The client wants this giant voluminous ceiling, but they want to create an intimate experience. And I really think that they're not going to get that with a 30-foot ceiling. And I think we need to figure out how to create a more intimate box for them, and things like that, or the effective lighting and all of this stuff. We just really every day, every moment of every day, think about that.
I wanted to go back briefly to your friendship. You started out together in the same education degree, and you followed different paths, but you didn't really speak much about how your friendship influenced your career path, if at all, or is it kind of how did your friendship impact your work or your lives?
Yeah, I think that was interesting. What was interesting about this conversation, I think I was thinking about when Nina went to Avrico, and Avrico was sort of emergent, and that was sort of a break. Nina was breaking, but it was also kind of a break with the minimal extreme modernism, that was trendy maybe, but it was also undergirded by the education that we had. So, I think that was sort of, interesting and liberating for all of us, and inspirational to see. I think more than anything, to be able to have women friends who are serious about their career, who are trying to do all the parts has been incredibly important. You know, I wouldn't say, oh, I did this because of Nina, or you know, I think what's been interesting about us is, you know, we've had like a lot of parallels. Like we live close together, we're friends, we had children around the same time, you know, our husbands are friends, and you know, and I know that Nina is serious about her work, and you know, I started working in sort of some of our product design, right? And you know, I can tap Nina. It's like, that's not my area. It's not what I've done to date. You know, I've gotten smarter about it, but you know, to have somebody who's doing something different but related in a serious way has been the value that I've gotten, you know, besides just the human value of having a friend who, you know, maybe a cousin. It's a little bit of a joke, but yeah, that's sort of been the value to me. You know, somebody who's not in my world, who's not in my day-to-day, who I can bounce something off of and kind of get unbiased, you know, like unbiased sort of opinion on has been, you know, very, very valuable. And you know, has been, I think, one of the reasons why we've stayed friends and stayed connected.
Yeah, I agree. Just like, I mean, just even like watching Julia and all that she does is just inspiring to me, and keeps me has kept me like motivated, or like it's validating, like, oh yeah, we can do great things, you know, like look at her, she's kicking ass, like she's doing so much. And like to see you like believe in yourself and like even like do the things that you have been doing, start all these like initiatives within SOM, not just even climbing the ranks, but like doing all the extra things like that. I don't know. It has always just been very validating for me to see. And then I think as we sort of grew in our careers, like I remember even maybe it was last summer when I invited myself to Montauk for a whole week, and we had a little co-working space where like we were each in our individual rooms working all day while our kids were at camp. But like just being able to talk to you about random work things, you know, and like even though we were in different places, but just having somebody to bounce stuff off of and say like, is this normal? What's your experience with this? What do you think of this? Is just so important. It's just very validating, you know?
I feel like we're asking all the questions, but I'm sure you know, don't be shy. Unmute yourself and ask your questions, as, you know, especially Elizabeth, as you're going into the field and working in your first jobs. I'm sure you're learning a lot from us because we've been through this for decades, but there may be questions that we're not asking of each other that you might want to know about. So don't be shy.
And they can be practical questions about things you're experiencing in your career right now. It can be something that we can help you with, or it can be specific to Nina and Julia's stories.
Also, Kanisha just unmuted, so I think we
have
the floor. Hi.
I do have a question. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be with you all virtually. So I'm not an architect and do not intend to become one, but I do work in the build industry. And I live in central New York, and we're going through a sort of building renaissance, if you will. We have a lot of older housing stock and a lot of need for new housing, and so we're all trying to figure out creative ways to retrofit and rebuild housing. And so I guess my question really is just, as architects, how do you engage with other professionals within the building trades? And maybe are there things that you would like us to know, or ways that we could better collaborate with one another?
Well, what's your specific role? Can you be more specific about
what? So I project manage, like I'm renovating a house currently, purchasing another house, and I'm renovating that one. And so I'm the project manager for each of these buildings and also the owner of each of these buildings, and intend to rent those out. But I'm looking to do this as like as a career. Is that even legitimate for to architects? You know, like I'm curious to know.
Yeah,
Everyone
I
else
mean,
has a
are you
form of-
working with any architects or are you just doing it? You are.
No, I am working with an architect. Someone here locally. She's newer to the field. I think it maybe has been out of school maybe 3 years or so. But she's really is just consulting on the project. So I'm working with contractors and other trade professionals mostly.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think like something I always want, I mean, you're like a kind of a client, kind of a collaborator, like you're both, you're a client and a collaborator. I always want to tell my clients design takes time. Like, I understand you want to get your place open like next week, but it takes time and it takes money and like respect. Like if you want something amazing, like kind of allow the right amount of time to get it right and be collaborative. Don't be afraid to share your ideas. Approach things with curiosity. Jump in the mud with your architect. I think that would be. I don't know if that's the right answer.
Yeah,
Julia,
I
do
think
you
it's
have?
true too. Well, I'm just gonna jump in because we just had a conversation like this a few days ago with someone in the interior design industry who knew of all of these places where women are networking with each other in the construction industry. And they mentioned Matriarchy Build is a group of women who are all in the construction industry, and they're helping each other kind of support each other in the way that we are as architects kind of, you know, in our mid to late career, speaking to the incoming professionals, and that's what these women are doing. There's also Move Over Bob. Yeah, basically she chose that name because she's saying it's not about women taking the place of men, but it's just men making some room for us in the construction industry. So there are all these groups out there, and I think there's some on Facebook as well. But there are a lot of women builders out there who are building a community, and maybe you should check in with them and also speak to them about how they manage to get their, you know, bearings and start their journeys in construction.
Awesome, thank you.
Elizabeth, were you going to ask something? You looked like you were unmuting.
Yeah. Thank you both. It's really been interesting to hear your stories of kind of how you've gotten to where you are. I wanted to ask about, you know, in architecture, you have a very standard path, or at least a path, and you've talked about this a little bit. You know, you do A, then you start with B, and then, you know, you work your way kind of up. And I feel like I came out of architecture school thinking the world's my oyster. I'll figure out as I go where you know, I knew I wanted to be an architect, but I didn't know what specifically I wanted to do. And now I'm kind of at a little, not quite a midpoint, but a point where I'm just so sucked in that I haven't had a moment to step back and realize like what is the thing that's really driving me. And I'm curious to hear what that point was for you, and yeah, any advice you might have to just kind of make your career your own.
I mean, you're gonna have a lot of those points. See, it's not just like one moment. It's just, I think, constantly paying attention to what you like and what you don't like, and really staying in touch with like the world, like reading magazines, visiting places, like living, like just really keep paying attention, and listen to your gut. And I think that will like so it's sort of in the moment, but then also like I think let that translate into like longer term goals as well. So you have to be very, very present, and you also have to have something like far down the road that's kind of motivating you, and just keep listening to yourself, I think. Julia, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to think, you know, because I do think my path has been a bit traditional, right? But I feel like with my colleagues, you know, we talked about our friendship and our parallels, but you know, a lot of people end up leaving the profession, or working in sort of allied fields. We talked about sort of construction management. I mean, I work, you know, on projects with so many people that used to work at SOM, for instance, or work with me, right? And then everybody like just switches sides. Maybe I'm in a small little bubble, but I think there's a lot of movement, and you know, but at this point, you know, if I think about the friends we graduated with, very few of us are like kind of traditional practicing architects, and that's fine. Like I think that's okay. I'm now I'm wondering what my point was, but I think that when you say that, you know, you're too busy and you haven't had a chance to think about it, like I kind of think that's great, you know, like I think that's living your life, you know, and that I know it might seem like you need to like it takes, you know, get from A to B, or, you know, have some kind of breakthrough, but you know, I think as long as you're learning and feeling challenged, right? I don't think you want to go, you know, back to that idea of like tapping into your talents, the stuff you're really good at. But learning, I don't know. That's sort of if I had to assign a recipe, that would be the recipe. Like being there every day. That doesn't happen, right? You're not gonna like get that every day. Like work-life balance, you don't get that every day. But you know, you get it over a bigger chunk of time, you know, maybe like a year or something. But you know, it sounds like you're in it, and that's wonderful.
Yeah, and
Don't worry.
there are no wrong turns. Everything you learn, like you can learn something from every single experience, good or bad. And I think Julia, you made this point earlier, and I think for younger people, it's very important. Like, yes, listen to your gut, but also that doesn't mean like cut and run and like stay at a job for 6 months and then get another one for 6 months, and then like stick around, see a project through, like really commit. Unless you're like miserable and it's like a toxic work environment, you really know. But if you feel like you're learning, like stay for a while, you know. Like I think there's value in committing to something and like staying for a little while before you kind of like make a very informed decision about what your next move is.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, this reminds me of something that Nancy spoke to us before we even started this group. Nancy is a business development consultant, or, you know, until she came full circle back into construction and development, she came through our office when Angelique and I were working together, also in a recession where it was just the two of us in the office. Kind of after 20 years of building high-end residential projects, kind of looking up saying, where have I been? Where am I now? Where do I want to go next? And Nancy came through and she started asking us very simple questions. And one of them that I thought was really unique, but spoke to me in a big way. She said, make a list of all of the people you know who are your biggest champions and allies and cheerleaders, and just make a list. Like, you're not alone in this. You already know all the people who are in your network. You don't have to go into a party and meet some new people. The people who are your biggest cheerleaders, you already know. They can be, as Julia said, her dad, your romantic partner, your friends from middle school, cousins. I mean, people that you've worked with on a job before you went to college. I mean, you're surrounded by people who believe in you, and just make a list and you'll be surprised at how many people who are your biggest fans. And start there. And they will be more than happy to help you out and help you in your journey, if it isn't just to cheer you on, which is the best thing that they can do.
Yeah, I love what both you, Nina and Julia, said earlier, kind of collectively, having a friend in the industry that's going through a lot of the similar life experiences that you're going through, as being both validating, inspiring and comforting all at once, which is like really what you need generally to, survive. Because architecture is it's a tough career.
But also, to Julia's point, once you get in your job, your waking hours will be at work among your colleagues, and you will be building your network of friends and peers and supporters. And maybe it's not somebody who's going to bring you a job, but then maybe they will have worked somewhere and they know somebody who still works at the firm that you want to apply to. And that connection is so important. Or it's somebody who, like Julia and Nina, maybe they're not working together per se, but Julia has a project that requires product development, and then that colleague is really good at that, and you can partner and bounce off ideas. Just having this network of people around you who you admire and trust, and who are doing something totally different from you, can add real richness to your journey. And I'm sure people in school that you've graduated with who are going and working at different firms from you and following a very different path. That doesn't mean that they're now irrelevant to you. They might be a future opportunity as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I got that was how I was able to start my own studio. Was a former colleague of mine from Avroco was design director at Auberge, and she called me about a project, not expecting that I was going to do it, but that's how I ended up with it, And a lot of former colleagues, that I was on the design side with are now on the brand side or on the developer side even. I have another former colleague who I'm doing a project for right now. She's on the developer side of things, so she's my client, which for better or worse,
Yeah, in fact, Nina, when you were talking about your story, you said that you were really enthralled by restaurants and hospitality in public, and you wanted to do that work, and so you asked your boss, should we get these kinds of projects? And he said, sure, by all means. And you went out there trying to find them. He said that wasn't the way to find projects. Maybe you'd like to talk about what it takes.
Oh, I
As
mean,
you kind of alluded to right now through those connections.
totally. I mean, it goes back to just this question that we were talking about. Like, I could never have started my own studio without the experience that I've had, both in the design side and the brand side. Like, I think when I went to Starwood Hotels and I was there for 3.5 years, I mean, that was just like, for the network alone was just like an incredibly valuable experience for me, because I mean, yeah, I'm an introvert, which makes the business development part kind of hard, especially in my industry, which is chock full of extroverts who just love hanging out all the time. And like, so I have to go to all the events and like, schmooze and like, but you know, I've got people looking out for me, that like want to see me succeed because we've worked together before in various capacities. Like we're so supportive. It's a fantastic group of people introducing me to this person, shortlisting me on this project, you know, whereas like if I had just started my own studio and I didn't have this network, it would just be impossible to get the kind of work, especially in hospitality. It's very different, I think, than private residential, because private residential is private residential. It's a totally different business. It's a different way of marketing yourself. Hospitality specifically is about networking and knowing a ton of people and staying on their good side so that they give you work or refer you, you know. Networks are very important.
Well, as we're coming very fast on 8:30, I just wanted to see if you had some parting words maybe for all of our attendees and to each other as you're hosting this event together. Say something you've never told each other before, which is doubtful. I feel like you say what you mean all the time.
Yeah, well, it was a nice opportunity to sort of talk to each other and sort of plan questions and you know, kind of say nice things about each other that, you know, you don't, they're not the chit chat, right? Or when we catch up with each other, it's really it's much more personal. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity. I'm really grateful for everyone who helped me along my way. And, you know, and I think about that a lot when I talk to other people who are kind of finding their way. And, you know, I think there's a tremendous amount of generosity that is, sort of embodied by this group. You know, there's a lot of women who want to help other women, and that's inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, ditto. I'm super grateful for this opportunity. Like I think it's very cool to be able to reflect on, you know, it's like you do get caught up in stuff and you don't really like it. I don't know, I guess the opportunity to reflect on like my own path is kind of like, oh yeah, I've done some stuff. Like it's great. And like, and especially the chance to, I mean, interview your friend, like there are things like we've talked about stuff, but I think that I even like learned stuff just in this process about, I don't know, stuff we haven't talked about before with regard to our jobs, which was really cool.
Yeah.
Somebody we've known each other for over 20 years, you know, it's a long time.
So in that sense, if you had to tell your younger self something that you know now, what would it be?
It will be okay.
Yeah. Or like, honestly, like you can do it. Like you're good enough. You're smart enough. Like it's
People like you.
People like you. Like you can do this. You're stronger than you think you are. And you do not have to take shit from those people that are giving you the shit. Like just, it's like you're, yeah, I don't know. Just advocate for, that's what I would tell myself, to advocate for myself more, because I definitely didn't do that enough coming up. I sort of prioritized everybody else's opinions and experiences over my own a little too much, I think. I'm still learning.
Well, as you get older, you also learn much more about yourself and are more comfortable saying, actually, I don't like that. I like this. This is what I'm going to do, right?
Yeah.
But
I don't
Julia,
care what you like.
yeah.
I don't care what you think.
Julia, your turn. What would you tell your younger self?
Oh, I would that it's going to be okay.
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Okay,
Well,
everybody.
thank you both for sharing your story and kind of having a conversation between friends. It was nice to kind of sit back. It's like you gave us a lens into your private relationship. And so it was really, it was nice to witness. And so thank you for letting us witness it and take part in this conversation with you guys.
Yeah, same here. Have a great evening, and we'll be back with a new seminar on January 17th with Laura Gresson and Belanley Williams. And they're going to talk more about the kind of the, well, Belanley Williams is the CFO of Mancini Duffy. So they're more in the finance and money aspect of architecture. And, you know, as licensed architect, Laura Gresson is going into getting a Master of Business degree. And she says that it's really informed her path forward, and having an architecture background really makes her stand out in her field. So look out for the announcements for January 17th, and we hope to see you then. And happy holidays, everybody.
Exactly.
you.
Happy holidays. We won't see you until the new year.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.